If you want to get a good view of Minnesota history, start traveling on the southern end of the 35W bridge, and you will cross over the bridge that collapsed and was rebuilt. Go about 77 miles to the north, and you'll run into the little town of Hinckley, Minnesota. And you'll find two important things at Hinckley. One is Toby's Cafe, where you get the best buttermilk donuts in the state of Minnesota, and they've been that way for at least half a century. The second thing you'll discover is when you cross Highway 35 at Hinckley, Minnesota, you will be driving upon the highway that has influenced the course of American history more than any other highway anywhere in America. The Randall Tigue, the speech is the Randall Tigue Highway 35 theory of American politics. And it is that there is no stretch of highway anywhere in America that has influenced the course of American history more than Highway 35 between Hinckley and Duluth, Minnesota. And at the end of this speech, I'm going to issue a challenge. After listening to this speech, I will challenge anybody in this audience to name me a single highway anywhere in America that has altered the course of American history the way Highway 35 has. It dates back to 1962, and Elmer L. Anderson, governor of Minnesota, was seeking re-election. He was a moderate Republican governor and extremely popular. So popular, in fact, that he scared the only Democrat who really had a chance of unseating him, Attorney General Walter Mondale, out of the race. The only Democrat willing to challenge Elmer Anderson was Lieutenant Governor Karl Rovag. If you were to compile a list of the least charismatic politicians in American history, Karl Rovag would be right up at the top of the list. He was physically homely. He was as dull and boring a public speaker as you ever wanted to listen to. And on top of that, he was a drunk. Karl Rovag's nomination by the Democrats meant Elmer Anderson would win re-election in a cakewalk. And so it appeared until a week before the election, when Elmer Anderson engaged in a photo op, not unlike photo ops engaged in by politicians throughout history. The Minnesota Highway Department completed construction on Interstate 35 between the cities of Hinckley and Duluth. Elmer Anderson cut the ribbon, opening the highway to public travel. That ribbon-cutting ceremony would be Elmer Anderson's downfall. A federal highway official by the name of McDonald, who just happened to be the brother of Mike McDonald at Rovag campaign aide, issued a report on the federal government stationery saying that the Minnesota Highway Department had accelerated construction on Interstate 35 to enable that ribbon-cutting ceremony to take place a week before the election. And in doing so, the Highway Department had violated basic construction and safety standards. The Highway Department had poured concrete in sub-freezing condition, so when the temperature rose, the concrete would melt and the road would crumble. The Highway Department had laid the wire mesh too low, so it could not sustain vehicular traffic. They had constructed the shoulders with unauthorized material. The report said not only was the highway unsafe for public travel, but the construction was so bad that all of Minnesota's future highway funding was in jeopardy. After the election, it turned out that the report was 99% hosspucky. There was some bad construction on the highway. It was repaired for a nominal amount of money, neither the public safety nor Minnesota's highway funding was ever in jeopardy. But anomalously, this highway scandal caused Karl Rovag to be elected governor of Minnesota by 91 votes. It was the closest election in Minnesota history, and until Coleman and Franken in 2008, it was the longest recount in Minnesota history. And to this day, when a politician wins public office by a last-minute dirty trick, in Minnesota, that politician is said to be pulling a Highway 35. Now, Highway 35 causes this uncharismatic drunk to be elected governor. What's the big deal about that? The big deal about that occurred a little less than 2 years later in Atlantic City, New Jersey, August of 1964, at the Democratic National Convention. There, Lyndon Johnson accepted the nomination of the Democratic Party for a full term as president following the assassination of John Kennedy. His first task as nominee is to select a vice presidential running mate. He selects Hubert Humphrey of Minnesota. The only reason Lyndon Johnson could make that selection is because Karl Rovag had won the governor's race 2 years earlier. Had Elmer Anderson won that election, selecting Humphrey would have meant the Democrats would have lost the majority whip in the United States Senate and had a Republican governor appoint the replacement. It never would have happened. Highway 35 not only caused Karl Rovag to become governor of Minnesota, Highway 35 caused Hubert Humphrey to become vice president of the United States. What this meant is that for the next 4 years, Hubert Humphrey, by virtue of the office he held, was required to be the principal apologist in the United States for the war in Vietnam. As a result, when Humphrey was nominated for president in 1968, his nomination deeply divided the Democratic Party so that in one of the narrowest elections in American history, he lost the presidency to Richard Nixon. Take away his having to apologize for the Vietnam War for 4 years. His nomination doesn't divide the Democratic Party, and he decisively defeats Richard Nixon and becomes president of the United States. But for Highway 35, President Richard Nixon never would have happened. Vice President Spiro Agnew never would have happened. Watergate never would have happened. Chief Justice Warren Burger never would have happened. Justice William Rehnquist never would have happened. In fact, the entire course of American history would have changed. And now I ask anyone in this room, I defy anyone in this room, to name me a stretch of highway anywhere in America that has influenced the course of American history as much as Highway 35 between Hinckley and Duluth. Madam Toastmaster.